Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Cynthia.
how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Pretty well, also. Much better this week.
Yes, as far as health, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you
Glad
for
to
asking.
hear.
All right, hon. So we're going to on the 22nd, we're going to go over the second test, and then we're going to go
Hmm.
over the Latins in the Gilded Age. All right. So
Mhm.
but what I wanted to do is just real kind of quickly. I won't spend too much time on it, I promise, because I'm not sure
Mhm.
if there are questions on the test applicable to it. But what I'd like to do when I have an in-class assignment or in-class is I go over a general narrative of
Mhm.
the West, right? Of the US, of the Americans coming into the West. So for instance, let's see here. Oh, it's not letting me do it that way. You can see this PowerPoint, right?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Yes, I can.
So notice there are three main overland trails. You have the Oregon Trail up at the top, and then in Wyoming, in southwest Wyoming, from Fort Hall, people would come down the California Trail, and that was blazed. And then there's something called Walker Pass, where the elevation instead of 13,000 is only 5,000, and it's relatively flat, and you can bring wagons through it. And then you have the Santa Fe Trail from Independence, Missouri, into Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then the Old Spanish Trail, mainly along here, along the Colorado River, uh, goes into Southern California. So at any rate, of course, that belonged to tribes, and they were very different. The Mandan and the Pueblo were sedentary and grew crops, had hit the European criteria pretty darn well. And then you had the
Yeah.
Navajo Cheyenne, and the Cheyenne kind of went backwards. The Cheyenne were once sedentary. I believe the Navajo might have been as well. And when the introduction of the horse and would trade with a white man, etc., they opted to go a more mobile route, and they became kind of moving hunters and marauders, etc., on the plains, on the upper and lower plains. And so there was quite variety amongst the tribes. And then to be honest, as far as extortion, right? Like stop right there and give us your blankets or your cattle or your pigs or your
Mhm.
guns, or else we're going to shoot you. The Crow and the Blackfeet were developed a reputation for those two things, for that. And then you had explorers early, long ago, and I'm not going to harp much on that one. Magellan, right, went under South America and named the Pacific in 1519. Balboa confirmed the Pacific going through Panama. Cabrillo claimed Alta or Upper California in 1542. Let's see here. Sir Francis Drake put the English involved in Drake's Bay after it had already been claimed by the Spanish 30 years prior. This guy, I won't even try to say his name with a GROS name. In the 1650s and 1670s, got France involved in the fur trading. And then George Vancouver, the famous Vancouver Island and Fort Vancouver, uh, of that fame, as early as 1790, claimed Oregon. And Alexander Mackenzie did by land. As you see that stone there from Alexander Mackenzie in 1793, that guy has lots of quote discoveries up in Canada above us. And then you had the role of fur trapping. The heyday of fur trapping was the 1820s, and that's when the fur hats and the jackets were really in vogue and could yield anywhere from 800 to 1,000% profit back in China when
Wow.
they were trading China already. So Hudson's Bay Company was the first major monopoly. Then you had the General West Company. Then you had the Muscovy Company from Russia. And before you know it, it became much more capitalistic with international competition. And in 1808 and 1822, these two gentlemen put out flyers and put out ads in newspapers on the East Coast asking for fur trapping volunteers to come work. So all of this, right, was getting gringos over to the West. Okay. And then you have, like I said, the heyday of the fur market was the 1820s. You got a lot of publicity from the mountain men. Like you see up there at the top left, that's Kit Carson. I know him so much as such, I can't even remember his first name, and I've read a book on him. But at any rate, that's Kit, known as Kit Carson. And he and several other mountain men became famous for being like these wild, people were interested in the exotic, the other. And these guys lived in that other world. They had Native American wives with biracial children. They offered their services as scouts to be able to lead people through the trails in the West. And of course, the trails originated with the Native Americans. They had already kind of cut those trails in the past. So it was a matter of us just discovering them and finding them out. And then the final rendezvous, they'd have a rendezvous in the spring every year from like 1825 to 1840. And for those 15 years, they'd usually meet oftentimes in Idaho and Wyoming. And they would have like a fair, and they would have like a flea market and trade with it and all that. And there was a lot of money to be had. Then you had the religious people, the American Board of what is it? The American Board and Commission for Foreign Missions, and they not only tried to send missionaries to Oregon and to the West as early as the 1830s, but they also they organized well and they raised money. Supposedly in 1831, 3 Nez Perce and 1 Flathead native came to St. Louis, and they said they wanted the white man's book of heaven. And so that went like fire throughout the churches on the East Coast, saying we need to go and save their souls. And so, and it came out in a newspaper article in 1833. Jonathan Green, he went on behalf of this board, and he was asked if it's true that there were a lot of unconverted natives on the West Coast, and he confirmed it in 1832. Reverend Jason Lee, he not only went there twice, at least twice that I know of, all the way to Oregon, but he came back and tried to raise money and awareness to the Oregon Trail and the overland trails, and trying to make it across the country for such. And it also helped that there was another depression. They had one in 1836, and they had another one in either 1839 or 41. And so their economic times were hard on a lot of farmers, and so this became alluring to go across the country. And then Narcissa and Marcus Whitman, whose pictures you see here, they were, quote, martyred. What they had done is they'd accidentally spread smallpox or measles, and it just wiped out the Cayuse tribe. And so their survivors came and massacred them, blaming them for it. And it actually brought more people, ironically, wanting to come in memory of their martyrdom. And then you had, let's see here, more publicity. In 1828, Dr. John Floyd was a congressman, and he did a memorial to Congress. And the memorial was written out by Hall Jackson Kelly. He was just kind of an adept, a skillful propagandist. And he just wrote everything to try to hit all of their emotional buttons in wanting to take Oregon and wanting to go all the way to the West Coast. So at any rate, then you had in 1831, the American Society for Encouraging the Settlement of the Oregon Territory. And they raised money and awareness as well. 1837, The Adventures of Captain Bonneville became a, that should be actually italicized and underlined. That was a book. And that got a lot of attention on the West as well. It's not letting me do it. Anyway, I'll go back to that. And William Slocum, I thought it was Slocum, but at any rate, he gave a report to Congress. And again, he confirmed that there were a lot of Americans there, but there weren't enough, but there were already enough to start a territory, that life and the conditions were good, and that it was a preferable place to go to, etc. So Senator Lewis Lynn, kind of like Dr. Floyd had done, he asked for the federal government's help. They wanted to send troops over there to protect them and build forts. They wanted to eventually annex it as a new state, which of course we ended up doing, but they were kind of ahead of their time. Thomas Farnham, he was sent by Horace Greeley, arguably the most well-known journalist in the country at that time, and asked to give his report on Oregon and the West Coast, and his travels in the Great Western Prairies were big. And not to mention, right, you had Farnham wrote of California as well. And he also, you also had a guy named Richard Henry Dana that I think I did put in the writings. Richard Henry Dana, right? He said, like, man, if California were in the hands of a more enterprising people, people that with better economic skills, he said, what a prosperous state it could be. And of course, right, he's stirring up trouble, and he's trying to get Americans to arrogantly think that they could better handle California than the Mexicans were handling it. And then there were mass immigrations in 1843 through 1845, where any given expedition could have upwards of like 800 people traveling together, and it got a lot of publicity. So all those things, right, help further the cause of gringos coming to the West. Robert Stewart was the first one, arguably, to go backwards from Oregon to Missouri and claim the Oregon Trail. 1827, William Ashley found the famous South Pass, which is 20 miles wide, a gap in the Rocky Mountains, so you could take wagons through it. William Sublette went through the Great Plains of Nebraska in 1830. And in 1832, Benjamin Bonneville took wagons for the first time through the South Pass into the far west. And when you look at the ecosystem, it was no joke. You have the Rockies up on the top right. You have the Sierra Nevada on the top left. That is the aptly termed Snake River. That is those are the Great Plains in the middle at the bottom, and that is known as the bottom right as the desert sink, the Great Basin between the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada. Then you have William Becknell. He was the first to travel across the Great Plains to Santa Fe, at least the one who gets credit for it. Joseph Walker, like I said, his pass that he discovered through the Sierra Nevada. Or no, Walker, he found a pass through the Sierra Nevada, not the pass through the Rockies. In case I got that wrong. Kit Carson was paid to write down his and publish his memoirs, and it took the country by storm. And then you've read about John C. Fremont and his 3 infamous expeditions on behalf of the American military. The third one, very, very controversial, right? As he again came into illegal California. I'm not going to worry about the last 2 slides. I'm going to go ahead and move on. But I thought it was worth doing that part at least. Let's see here. So we have the test, right? Coming up. So man, I'm trying to think how much I want to go through, if I want to go through every one. This is found in your handouts, okay? So remember, Bernard Bailyn is the idea guy. He says that our country was born on ideals, so it's real romantic. So you may want to take a look at letter B. Paul Johnson, that we were neglected, but it had a salutary or healthy effect because British royal policies were not enforced worth a darn. So option A should look good.
Wait, are you on the exam right now? It's not showing. Oh, it's on the slide still. Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Let me go back and do this again. Is that better?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, good. Then number 3, Howard Zinn, he had the cynical thesis that the founding fathers were demagogues. They used the British as a scapegoat, etc. Guadalupe Victoria, this is on in the handout on American Giant growing up, and Mexico was a mess. And so, yes, Guadalupe Victoria was the first and only president for quite some time to serve his full term without a coup or a revolution. That is true. let's see here. It's not letting me move the.
There you go.
Use that.
While
the founding fathers almost needed public pressure from common Americans to make our present government and constitution as enlightened and democratic as it is, Mexican conservatives could not or did not reconcile with liberals, as each nullified the other's constitutions and created instability. That is the one.
Yeah.
Okay. The instructor repeatedly contended that the ideological gap amongst the founding fathers was narrow, right? It was narrow relative to Latin America. Okay. And they made a conservative consensus rather than a liberal one, to not touch slavery, to not touch universal citizenship, to not touch having too democratic of a republic, etc. Which of the following was not included in the process of America's becoming a giant? So you're just looking at it in that section, and you should find evidence of all of them except for the Federalist Party dominating, which was not true at the end of the War of 1812. They fell apart. Number 8, which is not linked to the Mexican conquest, the conquest of far west, Mexican far west, related to the Jacksonian period. All white men virtually were enfranchised. That is true. Judges became elected at the local and state levels, and so that is true. They wanted to side with the gringos in the courts. Squatters' rights were indeed strengthened, and that hurt the Latino landowners. The Charles River Bridge case contended that there is equality of economic opportunity, and that emboldened the common American. The Worcester decision, defending the rights of the numerical minority. They actually did do that, but that would have helped the Mexican American community, not hurt it. So that's the one that doesn't fit. Okay. American court history with Santa Anna is, of course, that he was a tyrant and that his constitution was way too conservative and took away local autonomy and representative government, which it kind of did. Chicano history, however, says that they were looking for the excuse. It highlights gringo defiance of Mexican laws and expectations. Okay. Fremont. It has provoked interpretations of American imperialist designs on Mexico. Absolutely. With his third of his 3 expeditions, very fishy. Stephen Austin was depicted ambiguously as he tried to be a go-between, and he was loyal to Mexico until he was incarcerated. That is true. Okay, so I kind of depicted him ambiguously. William B. Travis, in his circular, asked liberty-loving Anglos to fight against a Spanish mongrel race, he called them. So he made it racial at the Alamo instead of just being against tyranny.
Yeah.
The Bidwell Bartleson group, they are seen as a Trojan horse because they were harmless. A lot of them were preachers and teachers, came with their kids and wives. And so Vallejo and others in Mexican California thought that they were harmless and told Sutter to accept them. And then after them came not so upstanding gringos. Okay, which I found was not mentioned as contributing to the American organ fever. Okay, so I actually just did that with you. The fur trapping business, missionary programs, published travel accounts, government subsidization of the overland trails, British grants of full citizenship rights to Americans in Oregon? No.
Yeah.
Which of the following is false regarding? See, the reason why I do the false or no so often is I want you to confirm when you read 3 or 4 of them that are correct. I want it to be a way of kind of finalizing in your head what you've learned. Okay. Here, Mexican politics in California. There are many coups, including 2 gentlemen claiming to be governor at the same time. Absolutely. They inadvertently powered rebellious Norte Americanos like Isaac Graham by borrowing money from them and employing them as mercenaries. Yep. Mexican government appeared weak after an American adventurer conquered Monterey. That is true. Mexican politicians successfully united when threatened by the gringos. No, they did not. They arguably did not. Okay. New England merchandise was accepted by Mexican California authorities, and this served as a window in for the Norte Americanos. Yes. Arguably, yes. The Bear Flag Revolt, it brought to mind, right, Vallejo's dilemma, John C. Fremont's skepticism about him, Mexican popular opposition was weak in Northern California, but tougher in Southern California. Yes, for sure. Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis was that the West renewed American meritocracy, right? So look for the one that talks about that. And yeah.
Okay.
22, Hispanics in the West. Did they keep their land and full citizenship rights? No, it's too bad they didn't, because according to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they were supposed to, but they didn't. Kept a large substratum of white collar. I don't think I would say large. So I don't think that one might be true. Lost much of their land. Yes, despite that treaty. Discriminated against by law and in reality. And were arguably pigeonholed into the proletariat. I have all of that in there. Okay. What do the historical sources bring to light concerning typical Hispanic responses to their plight? Some fought within the system, absolutely. Some fought outside it. And they maintained their culture very well. Those are both true. The Gordas Blancas represent Latinos fighting back both within and beyond the system, absolutely. Vallejo was depicted then and there as caught between two worlds, absolutely. The Mexican-American War was attributed to popular and party pressure to expand, absolutely. Was tied to Mexican and American tension over Texas, yep. Is often cited as provoked by the U.S. in the Texas border dispute, yep. And entails vilification of Presidents Tyler and Polk, yes, all of it. The American victory in the Mexican-American War was attributed in class to America's dual invasion, brilliant maneuvers, and technological and industrial might. Yes. Mexican leaders are depicted as having shot themselves in the foot. Yes. Okay. Which of the following is false regarding James K. Polk and Henry Clay? Polk and Clay received much public pressure to go to war. Absolutely. Henry Clay changed his policy and when he initially opposed war. That is true, and that's in there. At the outset of the gold rush, President Polk tried to ban Mexican immigration. No, he didn't go that far. Okay. The Wilmot Proviso did not. Remember, all that suggested was that in the states that we're about to take from Mexico, that slavery would not be allowed. Proposed to ban slavery in territories taken from Mexico? Yes. Demonstrate the contention that taking the far west would be like swallowing arsenic in the fight over slavery? Yep. And the very next generation, right? These people take Mexico and their kids have to fight the Civil War. Immediately lead to slavery's prohibition in the West? No. Mexican Americans lost much property, but not because state requirements for proof of property ownership were tough. Yes. Squatting rights over uncultivated land were strengthened. Yes. Many judges were now popularly elected. Yes. Many Anglo lawyers and corporate farmers and ranchers were greedy and corrupt. Of course. By way of the peace treaty, the American government claimed it taken by, quote, conquest. They didn't go that far, right? On paper, they granted the Mexican Americans rights to keep their property. But it's when they had to prove it in courts and at the state level where a lot of them lost at least portions of it. Discrimination, all except by law discrimination, right? On prohibiting loans, sales, or rent to Mexicans, yes. By law, segregation of Asian and Hispanics in the public schools? Yes. Just happening, de facto, discrimination in labor unions? Yep. And no promotions. Legislation prohibiting discourse in the Spanish language in the public schools? No, they didn't go that far. Court history of the Civil War suggests that it was a moral crusade against slavery. Begun by the abolitionists and the radical Republicans. Revisionist interpretations to the Civil War do not say that it was a northern moral crusade, the first one. The other ones are true. Radical Republicans, how did I depict them in that latest assignment? I depicted them right as being a mixed bag. They were both, altruistic and bold and a bit idealistic, but they were also quite vindictive, and their zeal was tested. William Dunning's thesis contends that radical or congressional Reconstruction emanated from Northern Republican idealism and good intentions. No, he says just the opposite. He said they did what they did simply out of vindictiveness. They helped the black people in the South only to weaken the white people. What is false concerning African-American agency? Look at the bottom. Ex-slaves never had a chance to be elected? No, they did, and they were. Permanent contributions of Reconstruction. Rights by way of the 13th through 15th Amendments, of course. The antebellum planter classes domination, yes, was kind of ended. Infrastructure and diversification and credit became available, yes. They established safety net institutions, yes. So it's actually all the above. There's none of them that is wrong. And then alleged reasons for Reconstruction falling short of its aims included the financial stresses they endured, spending all that money, yes. Presidential election of a white Southern Democrat, no. That's the one that doesn't fit. The 14th Amendment made broad and easy requirements for citizenship if you're born or naturalized in any state. So that is true. And why did I say the Catholic Church was on the wrong side of progress during the Mexican Civil War, the War of Reform? And that is, of course, the last one, that it was in an advantageous, powerful position with much to lose. Okay. So then we have Latinos in the Gilded Age. All right. So if you were in my U.S. history class, I would go over, generally the following. Of course, I would go in greater detail if this were U.S. history. For one, right, is the Second Industrial Revolution was the primary industrial revolution. It was huge. The gross national product, the value of goods that were manufactured in this country just absolutely skyrocketed. No doubt about it. Did we become more diversified? Yes, that is true as well. Did we have a lot of innovation and a lot of inventions? Absolutely. There's no doubting that. But then you had people complaining that there were too many casualties of progress. So for instance, the first group I think of are the artisans, the skilled workers. They made everything by hand, and they'd make one product at a time, and it'd be quite time consuming. With the introduction of interchangeable parts and the beginnings of mass assembly so what I'm thinking of, assembly line production, the artisans could not keep up. They couldn't keep up, and they couldn't compete with the manufacturers. So artisans kind of went under the wheels of the bus of progress. And then, of course, the manual laborers, the proletariat. A lot of groups and a lot of individuals seem to have been pigeonholed, kind of stuck there without much of a chance to get out of it. A lot of them worked horrible hours under dangerous working conditions, were not even paid subsistence wages, which we're going to get to next, or in two assignments. They would try to strike, and usually it did not work. Not only would their employers strike down on them, but they would get the help with their connections of the state government, and in a couple of dramatic cases, even the federal troops to come squash down on the strikers. The most famous were at Homestead and at Pullman, the Homestead and the Pullman strikes, and the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. And so the robber barons, the guys that were taking over entire industries and controlling every aspect of production from the very beginnings of it to selling it, like Rockefeller and Carnegie, they loomed vicariously between being seen as heroes and self-made men and being villainous parasites. who grew rich by exploiting their workers and doing ruthless things with their competitors. So Rockefeller, for instance, right? He would do his homework and he'd come to an oil guy and say, "Hey, I saw that you made a little over 300,000 last year. That's great. As you may know, I don't mean to boast, but I made almost $1 billion. I believe you have oil on your property that your machinery is presently unable to excavate, to bring up. Why don't you just take an early retirement? I will give you a 6% share in my corporation. And that will yield you, if I make anything like I did last year, and I know I will, and probably more next year, that will yield you over $300,000 with a 6% share. And I'll take the headache off you. And you can spend time with your grandkids and your kids." So some people took that merger offer. But the ones that didn't, right, he could get very manipulative. And he'd say, "Well, you know, I sit on the governing board as a major contributor to the Erie Canal. I can make sure that we refuse service to you and refuse to allow your products, your oil, to be sent to the refineries by way of the Erie Canal." So he could get ruthless and start like extorting them. Okay. And the public became aware of that, and they were not all too happy about it. And so this became known as the Gilded Age, right? That it was glittery, like when you do a gilded job, evidently in metallurgy, you just put a nice coat of something on the top, and you don't deal with the basic problems that might be happening amidst that metallurgical object. And so hence with this, right, it's a metaphor that America looks so shiny and pretty at this time, but you scratch the surface and yikes, look out. And so with these corporations, right, they had so much capital, they had so much money to play with to begin with, by having thousands of subscribers of stock in the country, in Europe, etc. That just wasn't fair. They could produce, they could have more workers and more sites with factories. They could have much better machinery and hire people around the clock to tinker with the machinery and make sure that it's working well. They also developed research and development programs for the first time in mass. And that's where Nikola Tesla became famous, right? Edison found him in Europe and brought him back, and they paid him in New Jersey to tinker with things around the clock for General Electric. And so at any rate, you know, you can't compete with these guys. And then when it comes to the middlemen of storing your goods or shipping your goods, right? There were no laws concerning what they could charge whom. So they didn't have uniform prices. And so if you didn't have any leverage with them, because they'd charge you by the pound, and you were a small scale cash crop farmer or a small scale manufacturer, they weren't going to make that much money off you because there weren't that many pounds of your merchandise. So they would charge you a high price. But if you're like Rockefeller, the Rockefellers would cut a deal with him and say, "Hey, what if I could promise you, 3 tons of oil per week? What are you going to promise me in return? Because you get, a certain amount for every pound of those 4,000 pounds, or not 4,000 pounds, not 2 tons, 6,000, 12,000 pounds." And so they'd say, "Well, I'll give you a 50% rebate." And so, okay, that sounds more like it. Let's do business. And so there were just so many cases in which the big corporations had a huge leg up on everybody else. And then one more way in which they did is it was the big corporations that usually did something that the federal government decided was good for the whole country. So for instance, if we didn't have anything yet with iron production, right? Or as we come into it, we have the Bessemer and open hearth processes to create steel out of iron. They said, "Wow, we can't compete up till now with England on that, but now in Scotland, and now we have a fighting chance. So we're going to pay you if you get involved in steel production, right? We're going to help subsidize your costs." And so they would receive help from the government. And of course, the main case are the railroads, right? That supposedly they're linking people from one region to another, products to a market where they could be sold. and it's supposed to help the entire economy and country. So therefore, they would receive so much free land from the federal government, in for every mile of track that they laid, to help them offset the expensive costs. And so at any rate, they just received those types of help. And then, of course, you had the mussel slough incident, right? With these squatters in Southern California. They no one was claiming the land. They farmed it. They got a local judge to acknowledge that it was theirs by squatters' rights. And then the Kansas and Topeka Railroad came in and said, move. They said, no, this is our land. We got the paper to show it. The local judge gave it to us. They said, oh, yeah, well, we got paperwork from Congress, not some local judge, right? And Congress says we get 1.5 miles from the tracks to each side, left and right. And our tracks are coming through here. So this land is given to us by Congress. Well, the people at Mussel Slough, they refused to leave. So the corporation met with the government, and the government sent federal troops to come force them off their land, these poor squatters. So it was a rich man's world, okay? So at any rate, I have here, court history of the United States Gilded Age would encompass praise for the titans of industry, highlighting their efforts in diversifying the economy, bringing order and structure to commerce or trade, providing jobs for millions of Americans, fine-tuning the quality of their manufacturing, raising the gross national product. Conversely, conflict history would depict them as privileged parasites who received unfair advantages from government, who enriched themselves off the exploitation of their laborers, and who buried their smaller scale competitors. Finally, functional history would not search for heroes, villains, or victims, simply stating how each demographic played its part in helping the economy and society function as it does. So even a cursory look at the historical data of Latinos during the Gilded Age ought to convince historians to create a narrative in conflict history fashion. So that's my thesis, right? Is you know already that I'm going to contend that this is about power, this is about winners and losers, and the big corporations were the winners, not the Latinos. All right? Which, like I said, is quite common throughout the rest of the country during the Gilded Age, which was roughly 1870 to 1900. Okay? So then I just go on and try to show that. I just try to show how the Latinos, right, were doing their best to join this new era. They were engaging in commercial enterprises. You have that number grow from only 591 in 1870 to over 3,000 in 1880. And so Latinos are trying to change with the times. The Copper Queen mining and the Phelps Dodge Company pushed smaller copper competitors out of business. Money required for mechanized farming rendered all but the well-connected unable to keep up. And the federal and state governments subsidized efforts to channel river water to farms, coincidentally, primarily provided irrigation assistance to Euro-American corporate farmers and ranchers. And so you have the rich guys in San Francisco getting the Hetch Hetchy money. You get the rich guys in LA getting the Owens Valley River water, etc., using their connections. Consequently, as Arizona began to integrate with the Industrial Revolution under the 3 Cs, fewer and fewer people of Mexican descent controlled production. In fact, Latinos now comprise the majority of unskilled laborers in industries like Arizona mining. The Anaconda Mining Company almost solely employed unskilled Mexican laborers. Howard Zinn, in fact, states that leaders of the Anaconda crushed the Mexican laborers' attempts at strikes. And it's similar in New Mexico. You have the Santa Fe Ring. They rigged elections. They chose provisional governors and judges who were in their pockets. They manipulated the law, etc. And I will say this to be fair, in all honesty, there were Latinos a part of the Santa Fe Ring. The famous Armijo family went back to being leaders of Mexican New Mexico. As a matter of fact, it was Manuel Armijo who fell during the Mexican-American War as the governor of New Mexico. And so some of them, right, some of these well-to-do Mexicans, said basically, if you can't beat them, join them. And they joined with the corporations and things like the Santa Fe Ring. But they were few in number. And of course, Chicano historians would call them vendidos, right? Sellouts to their people. I see this. They hired rustlers to steal sheep and cattle. They sent squatters onto Native American communal land and rancheros property to initiate the selling of that land. Ultimately, such tactics effected or brought about the loss of 1.7 million acres of communal land and 2 million in rancheros lands. So corporations are just taking over everywhere. The vaquero, right? The cowboy. He once was able to make good money coming up the Chisholm Trail and from southern Texas, getting wild cattle from the days of Coronado to the nearest train station or depot in Kansas. And he'd get paid for each steer. And at one point, you could get over $70 back then for one head of steer. So it was a very lucrative job. But the problem is, right, is the railroad stretched all the way deep into Texas, into Arizona, New Mexico, and into California. Now you no longer need the vaqueros to do the drive, the long drive with the cattle, because the railroad came to them. So now also you have the invention of barbed wire in the 1870s. And so you get these corporate ranches and they come in and they just gobble up most of the land. They close it with barbed wire so no one else could have their animals graze on their property. And they hired vaqueros to just be daily hands on their ranch, doing the hard work and not getting paid very well at all. All right. In California, you had the development of Mexican barrios, right? Mexican American enclaves that were kind of downtrodden socioeconomically. They devised Latino businesses for Latino clientele, mutual aid societies, bilingual newspapers, and other institutions and practices to provide for the basic needs of one another. But historian Richard Rice still contends that such California barrios remained economically deprived. So notice you saw some agency there, right? Mexican Americans didn't just take it in the chin. They tried to establish their own businesses. They tried to have their own business communities. They tried to organize as unions and strike when they were laborers, etc. But according to the narrative, right, as elsewhere in the country with the common manual laborers, they lost. Then I say, such economic marginalization. Remember, marginalization means you're kicked to the corner and you're not included into access to the American dream and in the access of the full rights of citizenship. Such economic marginalization did not constitute the totality of Latinos' woes, for they were socially or culturally pigeonholed into the proletariat and dispossession on account of a popular decision to amalgamate or put together sentiment toward them into an already existent racist pathos toward African Americans. So the way that they felt with the Sambo image about African Americans, that they were happy-go-lucky but ignorant, lacking self-control, lacking creative capacity, and so hence they belonged at the bottom, being manual laborers. They did the same thing with Mexican Americans. I go over the Great Orphan abduction. That was sad. Irish nuns, Catholic nuns from New York, tried to give orphan children from New York to Mexican families, believing that they were good Catholics. And there was like a posse that came out and kept this from happening. Did not want the Mexicans to raise these white Irish kids. Okay. And then at the same time, right, you have this treatment toward the new immigrants. And new immigrant, we're terrible at naming things, that generic term. New immigrant meant primarily they were not WASP. A lot of the immigrants at this time in the Gilded Age came from Southern and Eastern Europe instead of Northern and Western Europe, like England, Scotland, and Ireland, right? Germany. although technically Germany is Central Europe. Now they're coming from Sicily and Italy. They're coming from the Latvian countries in Estonia and Ukraine and Russia. They also came from the Middle East or the Near East. You had Lebanese and other Arabic people. You had Jewish. You had Assyrian, etc. Coming in at this time. So at any rate, they came in. They were kind of pigeonholed. What also didn't help is their votes were bought, and you can't blame them. You would have these political bosses with political machines. I'm sorry about my dog. But at any rate, they would come in and they would offer them services that they were greatly in need of. They'd say, do you have a kid that's sick? I could provide medical attention. Do you have a need to pay your first month's rent and unable to? I can help with that, right? Do you need a job? I have a connection with an employer. And of course, the new immigrants were like, no, I don't have any of this stuff, but I would love it. They said, I'll help you. Well, I don't have money to pay you. What must I do in return? And they'd say, you just come see me on election day. And of course, they would have these dirty politicians that were in their pockets, and they would have these new immigrants go on election day and vote for them in a kind of you scratch my back, I scratch yours scenario. And so, of course, did the people get mad at the political bosses? Yes, they did. Boss Tweed of New York was eventually arrested. But did they also take it out on the immigrants who were allowing their votes to be bought? Absolutely. And they'll try to do that here in the West as well, especially the rancheros and the commercial farmers that began hiring Mexican laborers. They began telling them, and that's for those who were able to vote, if they could get around the literacy test and the poll tax that they had to pay to be able to vote. And of course, those were put in as obstacles to keep Latinos from voting. Right? But when they could vote, there was much pressure by the Anglos of who to vote for. And then, of course, if you could, they have entire books on the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers were just awful toward Mexican Americans, just absolutely awful. I wouldn't even begin to know where to begin on that narrative. But very violent and discriminatory. All right. So do you have any questions? Any at all?
Nope.
Hi, Dominic.
No.
Hello, sir.
So yeah, it's kind of it's kind of depressing. A lot of this data in the 1800s, and it's not really going to get much better until the Civil Rights Movement. But I hope you know also that I try to adhere to that notion amongst Chicano historians that they don't want just conflict history. They don't want just to be seen as helpless, hapless victims in American history. They want it to be shown their agency, what they did, how they managed to cope, et cetera, et cetera. And so I hope that I conveyed some of that as well. They maintained their culture very well. When it came to miscegenation, interethnic marrying and procreation, a lot of kids were raised Catholic and Hispanic. They, like I said, they organized and unionized. You had a decent numerical minority who were of the white middle class, the white collar middle class, and you especially had that in San Antonio, Texas, Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico, as well as Southern California. All right. But yeah, this was the age of the robber barons. This is the age of big business. This is the age of the corporation and its domination. And there's going to be a backlash, right? And it's known as the progressive movement. And we will get to the progressive movement very soon. I think we might have to do overseas imperialism first, and then we go straight back to it. All right. So any questions or comments?
No, sir. Thank you. Is that I came in a little bit late. Was that the test you guys are going over?
It was. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll look at you're gonna put the recording on?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Dominic, if you don't mind, I will ask for assistance from my wife, who's much more savvy with the computer. She helps me post these, and
Okay.
I will ask her to do it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So that's it for me, you guys, for today, if that's okay with you.
Appreciate it.
I hope this was helpful.
Very, thank you.
Okay, good. I hope so. So yeah, you guys take care. Have a great week. And I plan to see you, si Dios quiere, next Tuesday. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you. You guys have a good day, okay?
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.